Hey family, it's Ron Spears with GrownManStyle. One of the biggest accomplishments in my life was having the nerve to get up on stage with the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers and sharing one of my many stories. This interview is with the person who made that happen, Satori Shakoor. Aside from being one of the brides of Funkenstein, which is cool enough, she's going to tell us why storytelling is so important, what makes for a good story, a good storyteller, the different forms of storytelling, and most importantly, how you can get over that fear of getting up on stage and sharing your story. Here is Satori right after the jump.
Well, my name is Satori Shakoor, and I am a storyteller, a writer, social entrepreneur. Um, I, um, I am the creator and founder, producer, and host for the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers, which is a live, curated storytelling event that we produce 10 months out of the year at the Wright Museum, at Southfield Parks and Rec, at Noel Night, at colleges and different places.
Mm-hmm.
And we have we video record the event, and it's where real people, ordinary people, come and tell, and famous people and everybody in between come and tell their true personal story live on stage and in front of a packed house
Mm-hmm.
of human beings of different ages and races and genders and sizes, and we're all gathered to hear the stories that are told that night. Usually, four storytellers, a musical performance, and a dance performance. But we organize the stories under a pre-selected curatorial theme.
Mm-hmm.
But each story is relative to the theme, and so they're very, very different stories. And our mission is global: to connect humanity, heal and transform community, and to provide a platform of uplifting, thought-provoking, soul cleansing experience in storytelling through the art and craft. So, and because we believe that your lived experience, when communicated in a story in 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, has the possibility of shifting consciousness, of
Mm-hmm.
changing a mind, because it takes you on a journey, and the journey is of a human being who feels and thinks and is afraid. And once you start to relate to what you know is human and true, then how that person looks and how that person's lifestyle is secondary, tertiary to
Sure.
an experience. So I have discovered that in developing stories and storytellers, that I guess the real work, the one that's kind of subtle,
Mm-hmm.
is what the audience provides, and that's listening.
Mm-hmm.
Because listening is something that is voluntarily given. It's an act of generosity. It is a human kindness. It's an extension of, yes, you're welcome to say who you are, be who you are, and I'll listen to that.
Yep.
That's where everything gets translated, is right here.
Yep.
You can say I love you, darling, and it translates is that he hates me. So you have to adjust your listening and be able to give up, because listening isn't an easy task. But we do believe it grants being to other people and
Mm-hmm.
other experiences, and that it's a revolutionary act, and that at the highest level it is uh, the possibility of love. So it takes something to listen. So what would incentivize a person to listen? Well, a really good story where
Absolutely.
there is no threat. You can sit back and kind of engage with the story and the storyteller like art. You can go to the museum and see and look at the colors, and the art isn't threatening to you. It's just stimulating you in some way. And it sort of disarms one into taking the journey. And so you have to give up something to go on these journeys. You have to give up agreeing with, disagreeing with, um, I don't believe in that. You know, you
Right.
have to give up something, which is all of your assessments and judgments to generously step in someone else's world, which is conveyed through a story and through
Mm-hmm.
storytelling, and be in that world and be comfortable taking that journey, because you can always step out. And when you step out, our hope in the work that we're doing is that you've expanded yourself, that you have become more inclusive, that you've been educated, that you've learned something, that you have something more to talk about than what happened on the last episode of Scandal.
Right. And that
Not
gets
that,
into one of my questions. I mean, why is it important to the culture? Why is it important to the local community? And why is it important to the storyteller himself or herself?
why is storytelling important? Because storytelling is the organic and natural way way that human beings process their experience. I mean, we move through life and we have experiences because we're sensory creatures.
Yep.
If it rains, we feel something.
Yep.
We feel something connecting with our skin. Now,
Mhm.
how you experience that thing connecting with your skin is your story. It stung me. I couldn't take it. Or,
Mhm.
oh God, it felt so wonderful in that Jamaican rain. It's the way you're interpreting, processing the experience that gives you your story, and therefore your way of being
Mhm.
in that experience, and if you examine it closely in your life.
Sure.
So it's like when you get the craft of storytelling, but then when you start to listen to stories, you start to heal, you know, because it's organic therapy. If you can listen, if you can tell your story over and over and over again, there's something to discover. It's like a jazz musician, you
Mhm.
know, riffing
Yep.
until that thing that he's playing over and over again takes over, and it goes into realms who would have known, and then it can come back to that sort of phrase. And that's what storytelling is. It's a process of discovery, because you know that I have an 18-year-old granddaughter.
Mhm.
So if I think of myself as 18, would I be telling the same story that I told at 18 that I tell now?
Right.
A lot of times we don't revisit our stories. We don't examine, have we evolved? You know, the uncle that I hated at 18 is the uncle now I can respect. Because I can contextualize him inside of being a man in the 1935 and in his 30s, very charismatic man, very gifted man. And the only place he could be that man was in his church or in his home, because outside in the world, he was a nigger, a boy, and something that. And so when he came with frustrations and angers and belts, I know now as a human being, there always has to be an outlet for these emotions. And I do not excuse my uncle for any beatings I took or any of my siblings took,
Mhm.
or unkind words, because that's a human. But I understand it, and I understand it because I saw fences.
So how is storytelling different than, say, poetry or preaching or songwriting or script writing for a TV episode or a movie? How is storytelling different, or is it the same?
Well, let's just say all of it's and to me under the category of storytelling,
Hmm.
poetry, movies, all what prose, whatever you want to call it. So it's all under that umbrella. You are delivering uh, a human experience, a human thought. Something human is being communicated to those who are listening, who are also human, because I don't think a tree, we talk and hug trees, we talk to our dogs, but the person who is going to receive that communication is a human being, because a human being is like the soulmate.
Hmm.
If you are just talking and no one is listening, do you really exist?
Hmm.
I mean, you are here, but your existence is accessed through language. So poetry is a form of storytelling. And some people, other scholars may disagree, but what's a scholar?
Exactly.
someone who has delved
A
into.
self-described described
Yeah, yes.
trait.
All I can say is that it's a delivery. Storytelling is a delivery system of information and ideas, and it's the most effective because poetry, again, it's it's sometimes it can be very intimate. It can be you have to sort of take it apart, and maybe it's just for the poet to put it out there and have people be confused by it, or it's something. Sometimes language doesn't handle everything,
Hmm.
and you just put sketches out there or words that may be disjointed or don't rhyme or do rhyme to get it across. It may just be pow.
Right. Well, it goes back into history though, because the griot and the African tradition of, passing messages across for future generations. And so, storytelling in that sense existed before the invention of television, the invention of, some of these different mediums that delivery mechanisms. This is probably the original delivery mechanism because it was all that we had before paper was even invented.
Well, let me just position storytelling as this, that storytelling is the ongoing and perpetual issue of what it is to be human. That if you are living and breathing, you are telling a story. Only
Hmm.
dead people, people who are not here anymore, cannot tell stories. They have stories that live through the other people sharing them. But really, we're always telling a story. We're telling a story now. This conversation is the story about your blog, Grown Up Men. You know,
And I'm
and
sure you've experienced this as well. I've talked to so many people, and or let's just say at funerals, and people reflect on the person who is deceased, and they say, man, I wish he or she wrote a book because he had the great stories and the greatest wisdom. And I hate to hear that because it means people just did not take the opportunity to write their stories down. And then I talk to so many friends who are alive and well, and they say, man, I've got so many books in me, I just haven't organized. And I just hate to hear that, because, and that's where I want to get your question.
we're in the 21st century now. And in the 21st century, obviously, we've gone through COVID, shelter in, where we haven't had the opportunity to congregate and be in the presence of large numbers of other human beings. And we
Mhm.
have still found a way to tell our stories. And we'll, even if it's just an iPhone and a woman just crying out her anguish.
Mhm. Absolutely.
It's a story. And even though she may just be, ah, 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 every human being understands that. So we are story machines, and paper, before writing in stone, before anything, before even silent movies, we cannot not tell stories because we have to somehow leave behind, we have to be understood. Like if you think about Helen Keller, who had no access to language, she couldn't hear, she couldn't see, and so she had to learn a language to be able to access and be in life in a way that was valuable so that she could tell stories and that she could leave a legacy of her own humanity, even if you're just leaving it for yourself, because everybody knows how many times they've been reincarnated if they live long enough.
Right. Right.
Okay, so we need to leave those to other people. It's to me, I think storytelling is a community service, so no one has to be left out of telling stories unless they don't own a digital device or a recorder or tell it to another person. We have a Desiree Cooper, you may know Desiree Cooper, the writer.
Mhm.
She's going to be on our July show.
Mhm.
And she has an interesting story that she interviewed the woman who and told her story in an article. It was a short article about the woman before Rosa Parks, before the
Yep.
1954 Brown versus Board of Education. This woman,
Montgomery bus boycott and Brown. Oh,
yes,
not the boycott, but the Brown versus Board of Education.
exactly. Well, this woman, she refused to leave Boblo Island. You know,
Mhm.
she was African American. They said, well, you're making these people uncomfortable. And she was like, well, that's their problem. And
Right.
she challenged it with a lawsuit. She won. So she was like the first Bobble Island. So if you're from Detroit, and that was, it was a segregated place at one time, which I never knew because this was after I went to Bablo as a kid after all this happened. But
Right.
Desiree told the story. Happened to be this young filmmaker was Googled this woman, and Desiree was the only person that popped up on his Google. So she
Mhm.
contacted Desiree and talked to her about doing this film. She said, okay. He went away
Mhm.
and several months later came back and say, okay, I have the film, you know, can you blah, blah, blah. And so it's the most beautiful film you ever saw, about a little over 4 minutes. And he's using these little puppets or these that have so much attitude, and she's telling the story and narrating. So we're having her and him on the show to tell how their union came about, how they collaborated, and how this film came to be. And actually, we're premiering the film at our show at the
Awesome.
Society of Twisted Storytellers. But it also, which I had to share with Desiree and point out as a story listener, as a
Mhm.
people hearer, uh, I saw where we can lift up each other's story. There's hidden figures, unforgotten stories that people can lift up. So the fact that she wrote this 3-paragraph article, she was the only person who had written about this woman that this guy was looking for. So she popped up, and so
Mhm.
she's actually uplifting this woman's very interesting story, and should be very interesting to the people who remember Babalo and that part of
Absolutely.
history, and that it once was segregated, which I did not know.
And I can tell you, I never knew that until you just mentioned it. And
Exactly.
that's
And now we,
that's doing a service to the community.
yes, and when we put this film on, we don't, a lot more people will know.
So what in your experience are the best traits of a good story or a good storyteller? What are the secret sauce, the key traits that make for a best story or a storyteller?
Um, okay, for the story, what makes a good story are the stakes. The
Mhm.
You have to have stakes. If you don't have stakes, then you have an essay.
Mhm.
You do my storytelling workshops. I take people through this
I
whole.
went through that process, and you ripped
Yeah,
me apart, and
yeah.
it made me better, and
Yeah,
I appreciate that. But I know.
you had a different experience with the storytellers. We perform the thing right there, like
Mhm.
surgery. But in my workshops, I actually take people through the components of the craft, and we work with three of the top things that I think that would have a story. First of all, a great story should start in the action,
Mhm.
that the character is doing something,
Mhm.
and that a good story, a great story, is a story that has stakes. If you don't have stakes, life or death, can I get there in time? There has to be something, some struggle, something pushing against that human drive.
Mhm.
And a good story is meeting challenges, being knocked down, getting up. Those are the stakes. And a good story should be simple. A 5-year-old and a 95-year-old should be able to follow it, and enjoy it. That doesn't mean you talk down, but you should talk to people like they're at least 10, because we all, when we listen to stories, are kids. We're children listening to the story, peeking around the corner and seeing how somebody else did it, looking in somebody else's window. So that's what it is. And so a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 60 and 90-year-old is going to process that story through their experience, like people interpret the Bible. These are stories, and people interpret it through their experience. That's right, because when I was whale fishing, I felt the same thing, John. Well, I've never been on a whale, but I can take this part from the story and learn. So it's all kinds of it's things like that. A good storyteller is someone who is authentic,
Mhm.
someone who is in touch with who they are, their humanity, their feelings, someone who is willing to be honest to tell the truth, to tell one on themselves, because these are the things that make them relatable. These are the things that endear them to the audience. These are the things that put the audience in awe of them. She just told that. Oh my God, that happened to me too, but I would never say it. You just, so it becomes, there's an opening, and it makes the storyteller has to be vulnerable,
Right.
because that's where the story really starts, with the
Right.
person's vulnerability. They're not knowing, but willing to go into that experience, and what did they do, and how did they overcome, and how did they handle that. I think a great story is a great storyteller should be someone that can do dialogue, can take the person, can feed images,
Sure.
because
Sure.
storytelling is about dropping images. So if you can use a few amount of words to create images to bring the people along. A great storyteller is someone who can manipulate time, and people can still know we're in the present, we're flashback, we're doing this. A good storyteller is someone that transcend the telling a story and becomes the storytelling,
Yep.
willing to use all of what they have
Mm-hmm.
developed as a human being at that point to tell their story. So if it's their hands, if it's, whatever it is that they authentically do. Oh, I didn't know you waved your hands like that. I didn't know I waved my hands like that, till you see yourself. And it's natural. You shouldn't shut that down. That's just how that person's emotion is coming through. So you just have to be willing to actually be human, to accept yourself in front of other human beings who you may perceive as judging you. And they are judging you. But once you stand up there and tell your story, the judgment falls away and the admiration shows up, because would they do it? And so,
And
that's,
you raised a good point earlier in focusing, and I wasn't even expecting this. A focus on the listener, okay, and there could be some truth to the story. There's a lot of responsibility on the listener to not judge, to accept people's truth for what it is. But I mean, I guess, how much do you play into that listener, and do you tailor your story to not sounds? How do you balance that creativity and the accuracy of telling your story, but and focusing on the listener and how they might perceive it? How much of that plays in a role, or should play in a role?
well, first of all, let me say, there is no responsibility on the listener to be inclusive, to give up, to not something. You can't not something. You can't
Mm-hmm.
not judge.
Right.
You're going to put yourself in front of the story as a listener, in front of the human being as a listener. And that is where the craft comes in. I'm sure you've seen movies that you're just crawled up in your chair. Oh my God. And, I can't watch that, but you do, right?
Right.
Because there's something about it's too compelling not to watch. You want to know what happens on the other side. There's a craft to it, where you cut out the fat and you continue to engage the listener. So the listener is like, from my background in theater, and particularly comedy,
Mm-hmm.
specifically comedy, if the audience didn't laugh, you wasn't funny.
Right.
And if your intention was to go out there and be funny and they didn't laugh, don't blame the audience. So I took that into theater, where the actors would say, oh my God, what a terrible audience. Did you see the guy out there? He was sleeping. I never see anybody sleeping. I never focus on sleeping people. I may include them, but I'm the storyteller is not there to play into anything. The
Mm-hmm.
storyteller doesn't have to play into anything. The storyteller is conveying and standing in their own experience. And if you're standing in your experience and telling your truth about it, there is no playing in you have to do. The person, you're accepting yourself, and you're the first person that got to accept yourself. So you don't have to cite anybody. Well, according to this validates me. No, the fact that I lost that individual and went through that grief process and came out on the other side and can say to you who are just watching the lid close on that casket of your dear mother.
Mm-hmm.
You got a long way to go, and maybe it depends on the relationship with that person, but I can say that there's another side. And I can tell you that I did a story at the Fillmore with the Moth. It was in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And Charles Pugh
Mm-hmm.
was on the city council at the
Yep.
time. And his chief of staff was Kay Bird. She had just lost her son 5 months when she came to see the show, because he was on the show as well. I told the story of losing my mother and my son. And when I came off the stage, he had to hold her hand, and he just told her, wait, wait, wait. She came to me and she told the story on our first Secret Society event. She wanted to, and she said to me, she says, I'm not where you are, because it was 6 years later for me. She says, but I can see where I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you don't tell, I didn't go there to tell the story for that reason. I don't know who's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are, whenever I go out and speak, there are parents who have lost children, definitely lost parents. So I don't, but once you know that, then you have more information when you tell the story again, and you can include that person's seeing and hearing into your story. So you expand from the feedback the audience gives you, but you stand in your own truth, and you don't play in anything, because if you're playing into anything, then where's the authenticity go? You craft a spaceship.
Yep. Yep.
You know the destination, and you know the map, and you get inside the spaceship, and you take the journey, and you take it in front of people.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because more you start quoting other people, and you're being something other than, your own self and your own truth. And that's
Well,
we will figure that out. We will see that, we, the audience.
you don't need to cite other people, and when you do, that indicates maybe if you're citing a theory. But if you're talking about your own personal experience, you don't need to do that. And if you do feel the need to do that, then you haven't fully owned your experience, because there's something that comes with experience. It's called wisdom. And little kids know from the moment they put their hand on that flame, they ain't gonna do that again. Mama don't need to tell them to do that.
I know that's right.
They're not gonna do it, because you know what the consequence of that is.
Right, absolutely. You mentioned 10 to 15 minutes as a target time for a good story. Why is that?
Well, a good story, it
Why is
depends
that
on,
important?
we're talking about a medium, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will watch a 2.5 hour film. They'll watch a comedian do an hour and a half,
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying, to stand there and tell your story, I think 10 minutes is a perfect time. Between 10 and 12 is a perfect time.
Mm-hmm.
And and for people who really know what they're doing, they can do a one-person show, right? If they know what they're doing. But 10 minutes is perfect. It's not too short, and it's long enough to have been developed. Because at the end of the day, really, a story is delivering a message at the end of the day. Even if the message is, I just wanted to entertain you or make you laugh, but really I just wanted to love you or relate to you or have you relate to me. Because as soon as we tell our stories, I say this often, and I hope people get this, that as soon as you tell your story, share your experience, your truth, you create a community, whether you know
Absolutely. Whether you know it or not.
community.
Great point. And I mean, I've experienced that myself when I performed. I mean, I've done poetry, I've been on stages and things like that, but performing at the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers was my very first time and only time doing a organized storytelling event. It absolutely won't be my last, and it's quite frankly something that I'm very, very proud of.
You're good.
I
And
appreciate that.
Yeah.
and I enjoy watching others as well. And like you said, I'm hooked in. Your YouTube channel is up on my TV, and it's nothing for me to just sit and watch people's stories. I mean, I'm hooked.
I'm so happy you said that. I'm so happy that you do watch.
Oh
And also,
yeah.
you can look at the analytics. Like when I look at the analytics on our YouTube channel,
Hmm.
people watch our stories on average between 8.5 minutes to nine, a little over 9 minutes.
Hmm. Mm.
So that's the average time someone will listen to a story.
Are there certain stories that seem to get them, social media, we don't do things for likes and for views and things, but you can't help but notice, somebody's story is going to have 750 views, somebody's story is going to have 35 views. We all can't be Dick Gregory with 25,000 views, but you kind of feel a certain way if your story only gets 35 views and you see somebody else has got 700. Do you glean anything from that, or are there specific stories that seem to just really get more attention, and should we even pay attention to something like that?
Well, we had Dick Gregory on our show, and Dick Gregory spoke about an hour, so we split up into 4 parts,
Hmm.
and each of those parts have gotten, like, I don't know, over 300,000 views, and we're still getting comments all the time on Dick Gregory because young people are discovering him, and especially right now during this time with all of the
Yep.
protests and stuff, he's particularly relevant. Michael Collier, uh, uh, probably one of the kings of comedy, was on
Yep.
our show. Every day somebody says something about his appearance on our show. He has going close to 600,000 views on our channel. Local storytellers so the more celebrity that you are, the more people are going to watch you because they Google you, and then
Yep.
they find you where they find you, and one of the places is us. But as I said, the stories that are most the most compelling stories are the ones that, as we talked about before, have those elements. The story has the elements, and the storyteller is comprises those qualities.
Mhm.
And then, because when people watch them, they will feel something, they will relate, and it will motivate them and move them to share it with somebody,
Mhm.
and that person shares, or people share. They send like one friend of mine, she saw one of our storytellers, Maxie Jones, talk about roaches. So
Mhm.
she lives in Alabama, and she sent the video to her uncle, who laughed. Now they sent it to all their families because um, roaches are big down there. They look like mice, and in New York, everybody has a relationship with a roach,
Mhm.
whether they want to admit it or not, or even if they were visiting. It's part of,
Yep.
they were something comedians talked about for years, and people laughed about it because their roaches are scary.
I seen them when I went to Morehouse. I kind of got my first real experience with roaches in Atlanta, Georgia, in that heat in Georgia, and then I was in Texas on business and found a huge one in my. Just woke up to go take my shower, and there's one and this is a nice hotel right there on the bathroom floor when I walked into. And I mean, I just put the trash can on top of it and wrote a little note to the maid that says, "Get this mofo out of my room."
Yeah.
Just a heads up when you take this up. But yeah, but anyway, we could talk about roaches.
They're associated with a certain socioeconomic class of people. There's a lot of negative, but his story was hilarious. So
Yeah.
she sent it around to people, and that's what people do. They share their stories. I see people posting stories that they told the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers on Father's Day. This story I told about my father. Rabbi Penson posted his. A lot of folks post their stories about that, or whatever the occasion is. They put their story. Here's a story I told, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that they can do that. I'm glad that you did that. I'm glad people can put their stories up there and share their hearts, because this doesn't matter it doesn't matter whether it's 4 or 5 or 6 years from now. The story is human. It has value. It's like a book you pick up and read. The next, how many people are in the world still have to hear your story. So I'm proud that the people who have taken the stage and have been willing to work with me, to have themselves be that open storyteller, and to have themselves, be willing to take on the craft. And it's people come sometimes, they think this is just talking, or I know how to tell my story, or they don't take it seriously, because everybody tells stories all the time. But storytelling is a craft. There is a craft to it, and and at the highest level, it's an art. Mm-hmm. So you want to care about this experience that you're conveying in this 10 to 15 minute story enough to learn how to drive like you do your car. This is brakes, this is so that you know a little about the craft to put that valuable, tender, wonderful experience inside of, so that it can touch. And because people are listening, you don't tell stories so that people don't listen to them. You tell them because you want them to listen, and you discover why people listen. People listen because there's something they connect to, and people connect with emotion. Right. Emotion comes with being vulnerable enough to let the condition, the situation in enough to feel something, so that when it breathes back out, you can interpret it and tell somebody what that was for you.
How do you get people to overcome their fear of public speaking, or their fear of opening up some deep wounds and being transparent in front of other people? What's your advice to get people to overcome that, both of those fears?
To go through the entire process, which means accepting the applause at the end of your story told. There is no overcoming of fear. You have to confront it, and then it. So I know as the midwife, I know that on the other side of the room are nurses and doctors and family members that are so happy to meet you and hug you up. So I know that that's going to happen. The storyteller doesn't know. They got to go through, I don't know whether I can tell that. Oh, I don't know. I'm scared. And they get frustrated because in some part of the process, I'll blow up their story. And put it back together. But it's a process. The second week that we talk about your story is not the third week. It's not the fourth week, and it's not what's going to happen on stage, because all we're doing is building a spaceship. We know where the map, and we know where we're going, and we have no idea what the conditions in space will be, which is the audience. The audience finds stuff funny that who would never know until you put it through in space. We don't know what other people are going to take from the story, and they take all kinds of stuff from the story.
I remember like yesterday when, the day before you perform, there's a dry run at the museum, and the guy who went before me, he took all day, and then when I did my rehearsal, I just went right through it, and you're like, okay, you're good, next, and what one thing that I do.
But how was he on stage the next night?
No, he did great. Everybody did great.
Exactly.
Everybody comes with different needs.
That's what that dry run is for. It handles a lot of things. One, you get to tell your story in front of a very small group of people, which is scarier than a large audience, because the eyeballs are right on you. Second, you get to you get to forget your story, you get to stand there, you get to experience all the things that will bring you potential embarrassment.
Yep. Just get that out the way early.
Get that all out the way. Nobody's judging you. And thirdly, you get to learn from the other storytellers, because all the things that I've been sharing with you in our private sessions, you get to you get to see when the other person tells their story. Oh, I could be sure, but some people just don't understand the craft, and it's for me to see what they're doing the day before.
Yep.
And then I call them up and I say, look, and then they've had the experience already, and they become more eager to make the adjustments because they've seen it demonstrated on other storytellers. They know the show is sold out, they're excited, and they're now are willing to do the cuts, and they can see what it is that I'm talking about.
And that's so important. And I get, and every storyteller or first timer should do that in front of a safe audience first, and then do that. But one thing, and I'm not going to call it a trick because I didn't come up with this, it just happened. In my dream, I would close my eyes and dream, and I would visualize myself performing the entire thing. And then the audience reaction, but more importantly, me getting through it, and getting through it without errors, you know, and that visualization helps me to perform. And so that's something that helps me. But you mentioned it, you have to visualize, you said the birthing process, but what's on the other end of that, and that having that visualization helps me with poetry, with public speaking, with anything that I'm doing, you know. So that's very important to you know, to mention. I'm glad you mentioned that.
That's very good. That's very good, because that's I don't consider that a trick. I consider that the very essence of manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
You see it, you invest in it. It's a prayer. It's a prayer, and you see it. And if you can see it, I think they have a little saying, you can achieve it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, but some people aren't able to see it, so others have to hold that for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you sometimes you have to like just hold the space for someone else, and that's what I do. I do that with all the storytellers. You know, I hold the space that on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be pure love. They're and then people will call me back and say, I want to do it some more. I'm going to do it some more. Or, you know, all through, I have had storytellers tell me through the process, I hate you. I hate you. Or some storytellers, I can't do this. And some people don't make it to the stage, very few, but it's not my intention to let anybody down, but it's not my intention to convince anybody that's convinced that they're not ready. Or there's sometimes I have to tell people you're not ready, not because that I can't share the craft or teach, but because whatever it is that they want to tell that story about, they're not ready. Like they may have lost someone.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're not ready to put yourself in front of people until you've gone through that process of grieving.
Yep.
Sometimes I'll go through the questions with the storyteller, and some storytellers say no, like no, this, like Dwight Stackhouse lost his sister,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, and right like a week before he was going to do one of our shows at Wayne County Community College, and he says, oh no, 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 don't you dare replace me with anyone. I have to do this. Don't you understand? I have to do this for my sister and for myself. So when somebody is standing, you know, they have a, you know, then it's okay. All right. You know, because
Yeah.
I know you're bringing something with you. You're bringing an intention to it,
Yep.
you know, and because we're not there to, we're there to share, you know.
Is there a, because sometimes I want to make sure that there's a balance between, of course, telling the story, but it versus some kind of self-promotion or you know, some cause. I mean, there's a difference between telling the story, but are you being sort of self-promoting or promoting something or patting yourself on the back? Is there any line that should not be crossed when you're telling a story?
Well, we have a policy that if you're, you know, we've had senators and representatives and, you know, all kind of people running for office, but I make it very clear this is not a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You can use your story in a campaign, but we're not here to promote one way or the other. Anybody's story can come here, rabbis. We're not. However, if you, however, telling your story is natural self-promotion.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's nothing wrong with promoting yourself. It's love. You're
Yeah.
not promoting yourself like me. You're saying this happened. I had cancer and then I did this.
Hmm.
Okay. You're talking about the human experience, overcoming. And if people rush down and want to know what you did and I often tell authors, please come tell a story on our show because what we get is your wisdom and experience, and what you get are people who probably want to buy your book, not because of your book as much as because they like you, they know you now. Because you can go to a bookstore, you can go to the library, and it's so full of books. Which one am I going to buy?
Hmm.
Well, you tend to buy the one that I know her. I want to know more about her. You tend to buy the best sellers because you know their writing is good. You like their flavor. You
Hmm.
know them, like a Terry McMillan, you know her life
Hmm.
and her books.
Hmm.
And so if somebody, we are people who write on our show or tell a story about about their work or whatever, they usually sell out.
Yeah. Is there anything that where do you see kind of the future of storytelling? In other words, kind of taking it to, I understand the art form has to stay intact in the process, but there could just be a creative delivery. Standing up on stage in front of people and delivering your story may not be the only way to do storytelling. There may be other areas, whether it be social media, whether it may be other types of ways of doing it. Where do you see a future and different ways in telling stories other than standing up in front of people?
Well, standing up in front of people is new.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, new is like like the moth does it. We do it, and there are other places probably around the country to do it. But if you think about the shows that are just about the oral tradition,
Mm-hmm.
just it's a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so these other forms, film, poetry, comedy, all these other ways that people stand on stage, and it's been defined as a specific genre.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a genre. So the future of storytelling, the storytelling, the storytelling will always find itself in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because the future is going to always facilitate storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
The future is a story.
Absolutely.
So we've already found the future. We're doing it right now on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, with the storytellers we have on our show for July 17th, one lives in Boone County, Desiree lives down south.
Mm-hmm.
I could probably get Joe Washington if he's willing to stay up in the Netherlands. We went to the Netherlands and did the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers. There were 4 events produced under our brand in 2018 and 2019. So Joe Washington, he's with the United Nations. He's a peacekeeper and he lives in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and was in the Netherlands with his wife, and he watches us. He has relatives in Chicago, and he invited me to come there, and I went there and I helped them install a Europe edition,
Mm-hmm.
and we did 4 shows. So we can talk to anybody in the world now. The other future of storytelling is I've always wanted my own television show, and Friday we did our event virtually,
Yep.
and I was able to direct a show that I can start to develop. And so next month I'm excited to work in this medium, because this medium is one I've been wanting to work in for years. But in the past it was a privileged thing. You had to know somebody, audition, get your script to have an agent. It was all these little networks you had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And now everybody is on the same playing field. Everybody is Zoom in or some other kind of virtual platform. Everybody's in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's about the content. Content is the king and the queen. And so because content is content, it can be a cell phone
Yep.
with 8 minutes and 46 seconds
Yep.
of 8-minute and 46-second story that changed the world, to put the world on their knees. COVID couldn't even do what that story did for the world. It was the
Absolutely.
opening to a shift in paradigm, a paradigm shift, and,
Absolutely.
and a way that we're having a conversation about race and racism and systemic racism that everyone has purported to want to have. Can we have a conversation about race? I'm not comfortable. How do we? How do we? This
Yep.
is how we do it.
Yep. The last question, the what advice would you give to a first-time storyteller, someone who has a couple of stories under their belt, and a seasoned veteran? What advice would you give a first-timer?
Um, as I said, bring yourself to the experience open, vulnerable, willing to look, be challenged, be willing to have your story challenged,
Mm-hmm.
and be open to the craft.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's your story. The
Mm-hmm.
craft is just there to support you. And so at the end of it, you'll have a better facility. You'll have a better facility in storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
in craft. You'll have a, a, something to preserve as a legacy for
Mm-hmm.
yourself and anybody else you want to share with your family, and they can share. It becomes like like a photo albums. This is your great grandfather's Ron Spears.
Mm-hmm.
And they used videotape then, but now you can just turn this little knob in your head and you can see your. I'm not going to
Yep.
say that. I'm
It's like a
not.
hologram, on Star
Yeah,
Wars, and Obi-Wan can help me. Obi-Wan Kenobi, help me.
and that is why we're here. We're here to preserve stories and storytelling. There are people who have done stories on our stage and have passed away.
Yep.
But their story is still there. They're still alive. They're still conveying wisdom. So as you said, when somebody dies, it's like a library burning. So we want when Martians come down in the year 3000, they want to know what it was like to live in Detroit and the world.
Mm-hmm.
Pull out Ron's story and see him talking about the island and how it changed him and how he impacted all of these youth and the difference that he made, and you can go talk to these youth and they can tell you directly. Had it not been for Mr. Spears, Dr. Spears, Reverend Spears, they would not be where they are today.
Yep.
Or Desiree Cooper lifted up this forgotten woman who stood up for Babalo and the desegregation of Babalo, and then a young white filmmaker lifting up that story. And we're telling it on the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers. I mean, we're fulfilling our mission, and we're mission driven, and so we're excited.
Would your advice be different to a seasoned veteran in
No,
terms of perfecting?
Well, a seasoned veteran, I would say bring yourself like this is your first time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we get seasoned, whenever I go out to tell a story, I always call my people and put and share the story with them, because so I can hear what they're hearing back. If there's something unclear, if there's something, I just want to make sure that my message, what I am, that my journey takes people to the message in a way, and goes through all the places I would like to take them to actually receive that message. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you doing this.